You see my screen now?
I do now. Yeah. And the recording has begun, so we'll get going. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our 47th Reading Online Research Seminar. Continuing to meet online, continuing hopefully soon to be back here, maybe not elsewhere, COVID-19 restrictions. We're very pleased this week to have Jan van Aars from the Erasmus Centre of Applied Sports Economics, hopefully giving me his title screen so I can read out his title quite easily without having to check my notes. He's presenting on common international trends in football stadium attendance. Jan has about an hour to speak in, and there's plenty of time for Q&A. Jan told me yesterday he's more than happy to be interrupted. So if you do want to ask a question during the talk, you're welcome to raise your hand or even just simply interrupt Jan. We're happy to be quite easy on that. So without further ado, we'll let Jan get going, presenting his talk. All yours, Jan.
Okay, thank you, James. This is one of these papers which I would call more fun papers than deep research. It's sort of been a puzzle to me for some time, the way the attendance numbers in the Netherlands went. I was aware that there were close to empty stadiums in the early 1980s, but I never did some deep thinking about it. So the first time when I really got into these numbers is when I moved from Tilburg University to Erasmus University in Rotterdam, when with some of my former colleagues in Tilburg, they made a nice presentation on Feyenoord, my favorite team, of which you see the stadium in the background. And then I realized that these attendance numbers in the 1980s were very, very low. And I talked to Stefan Szymanski about it when he visited us, and he says, well, there's nothing special there. It has to do with hooliganism, and it's present in other countries too. And that sort of stuck into my mind for some time. So there is also this low number of stadium attendance in other countries, also around the same time period. Then after a while, I said, okay, I'm now going to have a look at it. I can't wait any longer. I need to know more about this. But what I want to do is talk you through my thinking. So it's something that came about in the past years, and often if you do this type of analysis before you've finished your analysis, another season has passed by, so you have to do it. But now, luckily, because of the COVID crisis, I could simply stop in 2018, 2019, because we didn't have any attendance later. So I don't want to talk you through all these studies. There are some general studies which say which are determinants of stadium attendance in general, and football stadium attendance in particular. These are general issues like consumer preference, the fact that there are supporters which have a special interest in attending the stadium. Could be economic determinants, prices, travel cost, income, quality of the viewing, whether it's an exciting match or not, the capacity of the stadium, and recently there is also an issue of television broadcasting. So there are general studies, and there are two types of other studies on stadium attendance. One is studies that do match level analysis, and I've just mentioned a couple here. I'm not going to talk you through all the details of those studies, but just to give you a flavor of some recent studies. I did a paper with Lucas Besters and Martin van Tuyl 2019, where we looked at 18 seasons. But often there are fewer seasons. There's a paper, Spain 4 seasons, Spain from England 8 seasons, Portugal 4 seasons, and there's Italy, Di Domizio and Caruso, who does 5 seasons. And then there's James, who does 130 seasons. So that's a bit of an outlier in this series, because what's usually done here is if you do match level analysis, then you take into account whether it's an exciting match, who's your opponent, and stuff like that. But basically, what you do in terms of calendar time, you introduce calendar year fixed effects, and I think that's also what James did. But you don't do much with those calendar year fixed effects or seasonal fixed effects. You're interested in differences between matches. And the studies, they deal with the issues of loss aversion, uncertainty of outcome, both in terms of match and season, team quality, and so on and so forth. And towards the end of my presentation, I'll also show you some match level analysis. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today mainly. I'm going to talk about the other type of studies, and that's where you look at seasonal level analysis. So you have of many teams, you observe the total number of people attending a stadium, and that's one unit of observation is a club in a particular season. There are not many of these studies. A famous one, or there are actually a couple by Dobson and Goddard. 50 to 70 seasons of English football. They look at the success of a club. Ticket prices they find is not very important, and they also find a dip in the 1980s. But if I remember correctly, they mention it, but they don't do a formal analysis to see how important that dip is and how important hooliganism is. So they have a long time series. What they do is what I'm going to do later on is they also do two-step analysis. First, a club times season, and then they have club fixed effects, and they do a separate analysis for the club fixed effects and not for the season fixed effects. What I'm going to do. And so my paper is more in the string of papers on seasonal level analysis. Now, what I'm going to do is the following, just to give you the flavor. I'm first going to show you that, well, maybe some of you are aware, and maybe some of them are not aware, that there is a lot of correlation in terms of developments in stadium attendance and from a football stadium attendance in other countries. And there's one clear outlier here. So I have 6 countries, but after showing you what happened in Italy, I'm going to remove Italy from the analysis. So just giving you a flavor. And then I'm going to focus, that's the main bit part of the analysis. I'm going to look at stadium attendance in the Netherlands. I'm going to do seasonal level analysis. So from the start of the professional football in the Netherlands, I have 63 seasons. I opted to do a panel. So I have 30 clubs which were present at least once in the top tier of Dutch football. Look at seasonal averages, do 2 stages. So I'll first do a club times season analysis, and then we're going to look at the calendar fixed effects or the seasonal fixed effects in a bit more detail. And I'm going to relate these seasonal effects to all kinds of things that changed in the course of time. And then what I end up is a very simple model where I explain seasonal variation in stadium attendance with unemployment rate, a time trend. For the analysis in part 2, I use the attendance in the Premier League. So that works quite well. And then I'm going to do the next part of my analysis. I'm going to do a very simple analysis looking at trends in stadium attendance in the Netherlands, England, Germany, France, and Belgium. I'm going to relate them to the unemployment rate, to a time trend, and to international spillovers. Now, I don't know exactly what it is, but I define them as the average of the stadium attendance in the other 4 countries. And that, for some countries, that works quite nice. I think the Netherlands, England, Germany works reasonably well. Belgium a little bit less, and France doesn't work that well at all. But well, that's where I stopped with the analysis of the international trends. And I have something extra for you, and that's partly because I want to tell you something about my favorite club, but also to sort of show you that whether you do a match level analysis or a seasonal level analysis doesn't matter that much when it comes to seasonal variation. And I'm also going to talk about Johan Cruyff, GC superstar. It's a bit anecdotal, but he spent his last season playing for Feyenoord, and he had a nice incentive payment developed for himself. I'm going to say a little bit about that and to see whether I can say something about whether the fact that Johan Cruyff played for Feyenoord for one season made that more attractive for people to enter the stadium. And since that those are three elements of the last part of the analysis, I call it scoring 3 goals with 1 ball rather than killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Okay, so that's it. So I have many graphs. This is stadium attendance, England, Germany, and Italy, the 3 larger crowds. If you look across Europe, and you see the black line is England, the red line is Germany. They started professional football in the mid 1960s. Italy is the blue line, and what you see is that the developments in England and Germany, well, they are different, but they both have this dip in the early mid 1980s and increase later on. Italy doesn't make sense at all. So it doesn't look anywhere near the developments in England and Germany. If you go to the smaller leagues, so this is Belgium, France, in the Netherlands. Of course, France is not a small country, but the attendance is not so much different from the one in the Netherlands. Belgium is the black line, France, the red line in the Netherlands is now the blue line. There you see roughly, well, of course there are differences, but there is this dip in the early mid 1980s. Now these are graphical representations. If you do pairwise correlations, this is what they look like. So you see they're all highly significant and positive except for Italy. Italy is basically very different than the other countries. So from now on, I ignore Italy from the analysis. And what you see in particularly that the pairwise correlation between the English league and the Dutch top league is very high. It's 0.93. And I'm going to use that later on by using the developments in England as a regressor for the developments in the Netherlands. Now I have no idea what's underneath that, but I can only wave my hands and say, well, apparently there must be something going on.
But Jan, may I ask you?
Yes.
So when I look at these countries, I see that England hosted the big event in '96, France in '98, Germany in 2006. So maybe something to do with that, with the building stadiums, and Italy was only in '90. Just maybe.
Yes. No. So well, on my last overhead, you see a reference to the data set, so you can simply take the data and see whether you can make this analysis richer. I didn't intend to find the best explanation of these developments by looking at all kinds of events. I just wanted to show you that a simple model with just like international spillovers, whatever they are, unemployment rate and a trend can get you quite far for some of these leagues.
Yeah, and whilst you're pausing, can I ask you a question? So do you know when the Premier League got televised in Germany or other countries or the Netherlands?
No. No, that
I'm just
would
thinking
be
of your correlations, because obviously if there's been a rollout of live televised games in other countries, then that might be quite interesting.
yeah. So it's very hard. I think there are people who have some information about television broadcasting of matches, but I don't have that information. I don't even have it for the Netherlands in great detail. It's also the way clubs look at televising or broadcasting matches through internet has changed a lot. So I read back the book on Cruyff, which I'm going to talk about last, but that provides many of these details because there's a book on just one season, and there you see that the clubs often only gave permission for a match to be broadcasted on television if the stadium was sold out. So I do remember that we had to wait until 7 in the evening, and we still weren't sure that the match would be broadcasted because the stadium was not sold out, because the clubs thought as soon as we're going to broadcast this match, we can't sell any tickets anymore. And I have the impression that over the past maybe decade or so, it works the other way around, that if people see a match broadcasted on television, that might even stimulate some people to go there. But I see your point there, Peter.
My point is also thinking about why Italy is so unusual. And just anecdotally, my impression is that Italian fans do not watch the Premier League in the same way as other countries in Europe watch the English Premier League. I mean, it's just my impression.
Yeah, but you have to keep in mind that the correlation was there 40, 50 years ago. And I don't know where that comes from. And back then, well, we could even watch our own matches on television. Every now and then we had a Euro Cup 1 match and a Euro Cup 2 and Euro Cup 3 match, but that was about it. So I can't explain where this correlation comes from.
Okay.
And just while you're there, a question for clarification. Roger asks if these are top division figures only, so Premier League in England and
these numbers.
So.
Yeah, these numbers are top divisions only. Yes.
Okay.
And now that Peter is there, I'm going to go back to my first overhead, because these are I also have 2 seasonal tickets. I just wanted to show you that. And well, as I sometimes say, my life is very flat in terms of emotions, but the biggest emotions are to search for 3 times 45 minutes when I'm there with my son. We share a lot of emotions. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea that there is. I can't explain why it is, because it's for a very long time here, and the correlations are very high. I'm going to give you some intuition later, but this is as it is now. Now, if you look at potential determinants of stadium dependence, I split them up in 2. There are match-specific determinants, the performance of the team, stadium capacity. That I can include in my analysis. The quality of the stadium, I couldn't. I've read about these stadiums, and they're renovated every now and then, but I have no idea of quality, how to measure that, going all the way back. The stadium capacity is another issue. I thought for a long time, well, capacity is a capacity. That's not true. So these days it is. You have a fixed stadium. You know how many people can get in there. But if you go back, say, late 1950s, early 1960s, the stadium capacity was flexible. So you would have so I think FC Groningen, for example, would have 12,000 seats in the stadium. But if one of the top teams came along, they just set up extra stands in the stadium so they could get 8,000 more people in there. So I've opted here to choose as stadium capacity the number of attendance in a particular season that was highest. So the highest number of attendance in a stadium in a particular season. There are also other issues that sometimes clubs would change stadium. So I know that Ajax used to have a rather small stadium of 22,000 people. If Feyenoord would come along, they would go to the Olympic Stadium, for example. And so it seems rather straightforward. Stadium capacity, it's not. And I've done some sensitivity analysis to show that it's not terribly important. So first I'm going to do the math-specific analysis, estimating seasonal fixed effects, and I'm going to, in the second part of the analysis, try to explain the developments in these seasonal effects. Looking at socioeconomic situation, I have an indicator of hooliganism that doesn't go all the way, but at least part of the period of hooliganism. I thought it would be helpful if I could say something about recreational activities. Maybe that helps. Population growth is, of course, an issue. What I can't do is say anything about page view or TV broadcasting. That I think it is important, but I don't know which way, whether these are substitutes or complementary. But I can't include them in the analysis anyway. So if you want to go back in time a lot, it's very hard to get good data. So this is the setup of the analysis. So I used a balanced panel of 30 football teams. They played at least once in the top tier, which we call Eredivisie, the division of honor. That in itself was already a major thing to do, because the football teams, they change names, they sometimes merge, there are many things going on. They sometimes merge several times, so I had to make some choices going all the way back. So what is the origin of this particular team from the start? I could do that for 30 teams, 63 seasons, and most of my variables, but not all, are in log. So I look at the log attendance. I've included club fixed effects everywhere. I have a dummy for whether they played in the first division, which is the second tier, or the second division, which is the third tier. I look at performance indicator, so the ranking at the end of the season, goal difference, the points, stadium capacity, and I have these seasonal dummies. In the second phase, I'm going to relate these seasonal dummies to unemployment rate, Premier League attendance, look at cinema visit, hooligan arrest, and calendar time. That is how I'm going to do it. So these are many numbers, and you don't need to look at all of them, because it's basically a byproduct of what I'm interested in. This is just to show you what I find in my first stage, although I'm not terribly interested in the first stage. But you see, there are two time periods. This is the 63 seasons. This is a shorter range, because over that time period, I have some information about hooliganism. And not terribly important for this one. You see the first division has a lower attendance, exponent minus 0.31, lower if a team plays in the first division. In the second division, it's a little bit lower than that. The second division stopped ceasing to be, I think, if I remember correctly, can't even remember if it's early 70s or early 80s, but they're not in these later time period. This is the end of the season ranking, negative effect, goal difference, negative effect, points. If I include all three of them as an insignificant negative effects, if I do them separately, they're all highly significant. But it doesn't matter if I take out points, you get all significant effects. Stadium capacity is all significant. If you look over the shorter time period, you see that they're all significant. That's not the main point. So I can say it matters in which league a team plays. It matters how well it does. It matters how big the stadium is. And remember, this is stadium capacity varying within a club, because all these estimates, they have a club fixed effect. What I'm interested in is calendar time. So first going to talk you through some of the developments in calendar time. One is hooliganism. As I read back, before the 1970s, there was not a lot of hooliganism in the Netherlands. The starting point was in the UEFA Cup final when Feyenoord played against Tottenham Hotspur. That was really a shock to the Dutch system. More than 200 people were injured, knife wounds. October 76, there was a fight between supporters from SC Utrecht and Ajax. November 83 was again a match between Feyenoord and Tottenham Hotspur. It had a lot of violence going on. And of course, in response to that, there were various measures taken. Home and away supporters were separated. Police was present at risk matches. Well, as in many countries, we had all-seat stadiums, we had CCTV, and even today, supporters of Feyenoord are not allowed to attend matches when they play against Ajax and vice versa. So, if you look at the hooligan events, so this is the stadium attendance. These three lines are the hooligan events. This is Feyenoord Tottenham Hotspur. This is Feyenoord Tottenham Hotspur. This is Utrecht Ajax. So you see that the events occurred when there was already the attendance was going down. So it's not that well, unless you claim that because of this fight between Feyenoord and Tottenham Hotspur supporters, people were less reluctant to enter the stadium. I think the downward trend was already going on. Now here is some information about socioeconomic developments. I looked at the unemployment rate, which is this line, goes up from 2% up to 10% in mid-1980s. You see it fluctuating here. This dashed line is the number of arrests. So this is between 500 and 2,500 arrests in a particular season. And you see it's going up and down. It doesn't seem to be like there is a clear system in there. I'm going to use this information to relate it to stadium attendance as measured by these calendar year fixed. This is cinema visits. I didn't know what to do, so I was looking for all kinds of other indicators like the attendance in other sports, but I couldn't find any decent number there because there's basically only one sport for which you can easily find the attendance, and that's football. So I looked at cinema visits. Now, I don't want to explain the cinema visits. I just want to see whether it somehow corresponds to developments in football stadium attendance. You see, there's a big drop here, going up here. So you would have to look at big movies and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do that. I interpreted this as sort of a leisure activity. Now, this is the parameter estimates for the seasonal effect. So I have 63 observations because I have 63 seasons. Now, if I look at the unemployment rate, that's a calendar time number. So there's a bit lag here. So season 1956-57 has the unemployment rate of 1956. Now, what you see, unemployment rate and a time trend, well, it's very significant. If unemployment rate goes up, stadium attendance goes down, there's an upward trend. I don't know what it is. As an alternative, I look at population growth. It doesn't matter that much. Now, when it becomes interesting, at least then I was terribly excited about it. When I look at, if I include the log attendance in the Premier League, in the English Premier League, you see that it's highly significant positive. And still, the unemployment rate is significantly negative. The magnitude, absolute magnitude, is somewhat smaller. And that's because there is a correlation between the developments in the Premier League and the unemployment rate in the Netherlands, because also the unemployment rate in the Netherlands is correlated to the unemployment rate in England. And I come back to that later. You see, if in addition to that, I include the log of the cinema visits, it's also significantly positive. Then if I go over the shorter time period from 1987-88 onwards, up to 2013-2014, when I found these numbers about hooliganism, you see that the magnitude of these numbers is different, but they're still highly significant. They're still highly significant. But if I include The log cinema visits, it's gone. And if I include the log of arrests, it's significantly positive here. But if I start including log Premier League and log cinema visits, it's gone. So I can't find any negative relationship between the hooliganism over the time period observed, which was probably already clear from here. You see all these moves, you don't see a lot, but of course that's only visual inspection. So that's it. Now I've done quite a lot of sensitivity analysis, and I didn't bring any estimates. I'm just going to talk you through them in case you think, oh, why didn't you do this or that? I use population instead of a time trend. I use performance indicator of the previous season. So how well did the team do in the previous season in terms of goal difference or ranking? I did it all in one step instead of just two steps. I looked at the points achieved and calculated them as back then, taking a shift into account. So the points before 1995-96, because you got 2 points for a win, and after that 3 points win, did it separately, didn't matter. Had a quadratic time trend. Did a ranking by league, because the ranking you could also do it for the top tier, the second tier, the third tier, do a separate ranking. It still survived, and what I found pleasantly surprised is that even if I do club-specific trends in the analysis, that it still survives. Then I thought, okay, let's go back to the developments of the other leagues. So now I'm talking about the top leagues in these countries. So the Netherlands here is not replicating what I did before, the balanced panel 30, but this is just the top league. Do Netherlands, England, Germany, France, and Belgium, and see how far can I get with a simple model. So I started doing log unemployment rate and a time trend. And there you see that this is, well, I don't know whether it's remarkable, but you see that it's significantly negative in every one of these leagues. So if unemployment rate goes up, attendance goes down. And there's a positive time trend, which differs from country to country, but it's significantly positive everywhere. Okay, so that's nice. Then I thought, let's now see what other international spillover. So I took the stadium attendance in the English Premier League and use it as a regressor. And for the Netherlands, you see it still works fine, even if I do only averages for the whole league, so not by club. It still works fine. Unemployment rate negative, time trend positive. English Premier League, well, it's almost an elasticity of 1. Of course, you can't do it for England, but for Germany, you see that Germany, France, and Belgium is also a significant positive effect. What's changing is the effect of the unemployment rate. Here it was significantly negative, here it's gone. Significantly negative, gone, significantly negative, gone. And that's because the developments in unemployment rate are highly correlated between the countries. And if you start introducing English Premier League, which is in itself, as I'm going to show on the next overhead, also affected by the unemployment rate, then you get that the Premier League dominates, drives out the effect of the unemployment. So here I do the averages of the other leagues. So for the Netherlands, I have the average of these 4 leagues, England average of other 4 leagues as a regressor. Still, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I just wanted to show you that there's a big correlation going. Then you see that for the Netherlands, it still works fine, although the trend is now gone. That's probably taken up by the trend which is present in the stadium attendance in the Premier League. For England, unemployment rate significantly negative. The coefficients are very similar. Average of the other leagues, highly significant, but with a smaller magnitude. And you see that the average of the other leagues is significant all over the place. Belgium has a significant negative effect on unemployment rate. France, the sign flips, which is kind of weird. And so a very simple model, well, it's clear that there is something going on. What it is, I don't know, but there is like international, what I call international spillover. Of course, you wonder how good does a simple model like this perform. So I've used these estimates where I use the spillovers from the other leagues as a regressor to simply make some graphs. This is what the top league in the Netherlands looks like. The straight line is the actual. The dashed line in blue is the predicted. Doesn't look that bad. Of course, I could improve by perhaps including other variables, but that's not what I want to do. This is the Premier League. Well, there's a bit of, there are things going on which are hard to explain, but you see that by and large the development is not that bad. Bundesliga. Well, it's again, of course, we can debate on whether I should look for additional explanatory variables, but it doesn't look that bad. Belgium, it's a bit of, it doesn't look that well, but still the general developments are present. France doesn't look that well at all. Yeah, so that's it. Are there any questions on this? Because this is where I stopped my formal paper. So all the rest is scoring 3 goals with 1 ball, which is something in addition to this. But this is this is my main story. You can use a very simple model and still get very far in explaining these developments.
Jan, did you think about putting in what was happening to the national team in these periods? I mean, obviously, you'd only have the European Championships or the World Cup every 2 years, but I mean, presumably you could put in the state of the national team to see whether that's engendering stadium attendance in each individual country.
Yeah, I didn't look at the individual countries, but if you look at this one, this is the Netherlands. Now, what I found, I was really flabbergasted when I realized this, is that the Dutch national team won the European Championship, or how you call it, the European, well, anyway, the European tournament once. That was in 1980, which is here. Now, you could say because they won, we get this, but it was really, so in this time period, we had excellent players which you could watch in the stadium play, all these Marco van Basten, all these famous players. They were still, in this time period, they were still there, but was hardly, if you look at the stadiums, they were almost empty. So I see your point, Peter, but it's...
Although most of those really great players were playing for Inter at the time, right?
Yeah, I think, but before that, so say early 1980s, I'm going to talk about the...
Sorry, AC, not Inter, AC.
Yeah. Yes.
Stefan's got his hand up.
Hi, Jan. Hi. I think this is a lovely sort of example of how some very simple economic modeling can capture really quite a large fraction of what's going on in the data. But having said that, I think if you read the literature about what was happening in football during this era, there's quite a big literature which is perhaps more of a sort of a sociological bent, a more social history bent, and they point to a number of other factors which is hard for economists, I think, to capture. So there are an awful lot of social changes going on which seem to be common across many European countries, which is there's a big boom in football in the early post-war era. After the war, people want entertainment, and football is mostly the only thing that men can afford. And as the boom of the 1960s happens, then what you see is people starting to choose other leisure activities, and this is related to the rise of hooliganism because football remains a relatively inexpensive activity. But older people with money tend to be drifting to other things, and you tend to get this focus on very young people who can afford to go to football matches, and that's often thought as being really where the origins of football hooliganism lie. These kind of broader social trends. And if you want to make a comparison where this doesn't happen, I mean, Italy is obviously a very interesting case in its own right. But also, if you look at what's happening in, say, baseball in the United States, you don't see a similar thing. You see unemployment rising in the United States in the 60s and 70s in the same way because they're subject to the same macro trends as Europe. But you don't see the decline in baseball attendance, which is probably the closest analogy to football in Europe. And that's partly because you see massive investment in baseball stadiums and the development of the baseball as an attractive consumer option, which you don't see so much in Europe. So I think some of those broader social trends are needed to sort of round out this story of where, you know, the economic data can actually do a lot of the heavy lifting as well.
No, I agree. And I've searched for many, well, as I said before, I searched to see what I could find any other sports of which I could track down the attendance for such a long time. It is indeed the case. Well, you could say there is a declining in traditional industries in the early 1980s, and there are all kinds of issues like that. But it's very hard to quantify all this. So I realize it's a very limited analysis, but I still wanted to show that even with very simple indicators, you can get quite far. Of course, the question is, does it have any predictive power? But that's, well, so many things have changed over the past decades. That yeah. No, I agree. This is not that doesn't tell the complex story of changing social environment. I tried to get some idea about leisure activities, so I started collecting data on how much money people spend on holidays and so on and so forth. But that's very. I was already very happy to find these cinema attendants. I found somebody who collected those data, and they also show that there was a change going on there, probably because the television became more important. But I couldn't use the other indicators like that. So I agree, and I know we talked about it earlier. So in that sense, we've exchanged ideas a couple of times on this, but still, unemployment. I was a bit surprised myself that it can bring you so far in so many different countries. And of course, part of these developments are endogenous, isn't it? Because if the stadium attendance went down, I do remember that I think it was in the 70s. I visited a couple of stadiums. I don't know. It was like it was an old Roman stadium with concrete, and you sat on stone, and people brought cushions with them to sit on. So it was no wonder that attendance went down a lot. So clubs started investing in that, and then one thing led to the other.
Well, you may have seen Rob Simmons and some others have a paper that's just out in Oxford Economic Papers, which is about attendance and using social economic, using local unemployment rates to examine attendance and looking at using that as a treatment, as an identifier for the impact of the 2008 financial crisis on attendance. And I think they find that in high unemployment regions, there was a significant effect on attendance. Relatively depressed regions were more likely to see an effect on attendance than the less depressed regions, if I'm getting that right. Rob isn't here to explain his paper, but that's the story.
I don't know the paper. I should look at it. So what I also try to do is see whether regional unemployment rates matter, because then I found out that the Netherlands are so small that these regional developments are highly correlated. So it's not that well, you can probably move from one side of the country to the other just commuting. So I see the limitations, but I'm also very pleased with the fact that with such a simple model, you can not too bad. Could all be coincidence, but.
So yeah, and also Jorge's put in the chat a comment about Italy being a relatively strong league. We've already mentioned AC Milan in the I guess in the late 80s, early 1990s, and he wonders if something like the UEFA coefficient. I don't know how far back UEFA coefficients go, but that might be something to help explain those different patterns. And also, you mentioned the Roman-esque stadiums back in the 1970s. As I understand it, I don't know how many Italians are here to defend their stadiums, but I think there's only one stadium that's got any investment in the last 20 or 30 years in Italy, and that's Juventus. I went to Bologna a few years ago, and it felt very like watching football in the 1980s in England. So these are possible ways of rationalizing what happened in Italy relative to the other countries that you've got.
Yeah, I think they also had serious incidents of hooliganism. And I don't know how that affected attendance. So I'm not claiming that hooliganism is irrelevant, but I couldn't find any decent relationship for the Netherlands. But if I read back, so I'm going to talk now about my favorite club in Johan Cruyff, and there was a book published on just one season. They talk about well, because they're the hooligans, people don't want to come to the stadium. But well, if I look at the fluctuations in the attendance numbers, I can't imagine that why would they come to some matches? Some matches would still be sold out, and others they hardly attract any people.
Roger's got his hand up as well before you move on, Jan.
Okay.
Yeah, just as a point of information, looking at the statistics in England, there are some dramatic falls on a season-by-season basis, and two that stick in my mind are 1960-61 and the following season, and I think the fall was something like 11% across the four divisions. And that was put down to the advent of commercial television and the increased penetration of television sets in the UK and Saturday afternoon sports programming to some extent. And the other one, as you pointed out, was unemployment in 1980-81 season. And again, I think there's quite a dramatic fall on a season-by-season basis. So it might be interesting in terms of your analysis to look at individual season-on-season changes.
Yeah. Well, here you see the big drop, I think, in the probably early 1960s. Is this one? Another one there. Yeah. Yes. Again, I'm not aiming to get a good explanation of the stadium attendance each of the countries. And I'm sure if I would include some dummy variables for this, I get a much better fit.
Bernd has got his hand up as well.
Thanks for this presentation so far. I just want to add a few comments on the decrease in attendance in Germany in the late 60s, early 70s. So there were two idiosyncratic shocks. The first, Hertha BSC, a strong drawing club, was relegated because they were found guilty of having paid illegal signing bonuses. And Hertha BSC was replaced by a poor drawing club, again from Berlin, who still holds the worst season record in terms of performance. So overall attendance in the Bundesliga decreased massively, simply due to the expulsion of Hertha BSC and replacing them by another club. For political reasons, Berlin had to be represented in the Bundesliga. And the second event was a match-fixing scandal that occurred in the 72-73 season, after which a couple of clubs were relegated and about 24 players were banned for a couple of years, some of them for the rest of their lives. So, and this clearly threatened the credibility of the sport in Germany and damaged the reputation of the Bundesliga for quite some time.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can imagine if you take all these specific events to account, you get a much better explanation of the model, and for the replacement of Hertha BSC, you could, if you do a club level analysis, that should remove some of the variation. But I agree, there are many incidents which have an effect, but which, well, if you think about it long enough, then you have many dummy variables for many seasons, and then the question is what remains. Okay, thanks. So I'm going to say something about how much time do we have left, James?
We've got about 40 minutes, so I mean, to take some time now, we can leave some time for questions afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've done a separate analysis for Feyenoord, just to show you that whatever you do, the results don't change that much. And this photograph is from the Feyenoord Stadium, as is my background. This Feyenoord, I'm sitting around here, so halfway, not very far from the pitch. So Feyenoord had, when it comes to professional football, because that professional football started in the late 1950s, so I'm going to ignore earlier results. But since it was professional football, Feyenoord won the league 10 times, and I've seen the numbers here. There are 2 are in blue because we also won the Dutch Cup 10 times in these. So there are 2 years which you won the double. And there is 1984 is in red. Feyenoord also won the double, but it's in red because I'm going to talk about that season 1983, 1984 in a bit more detail. And some more advertisement here. It was the first Dutch club to win the Champions League. Well, it wasn't called Champions League then, but would be the equivalent, and the World Cup. Also the last Dutch club to win the European trophy, the UEFA Cup 2002, and also 1974. So I'm going to do separate analysis for Feyenoord, sensitivity analysis to show you whether it matters whether to do separate games or seasonal average. I'm going to say something about particular season, 1983, 1984. So this is stadium attendance of Feyenoord, the straight line. So the dashed line is the Eredivisie. So there are differences. This is the stadium attendance of Feyenoord. This is the average in the league. So there is a lot of correlation going on. Now, the setup of the Feyenoord analysis, I used game level data, so not seasonal level data, and I used some data that were given to me by my co-authors Lucas Bester and Martin van Tuyl on the occasion of me changing jobs from Tilburg to Erasmus, because Erasmus, if I walk out of the building, I can see the Feyenoord Stadium in the distance, so I'm very much closer. So they gave me a gift, as a gift to give me a data set and a blog, and they call it the Feyenoord Legion is dog loyal. I don't know, is dog loyal, is that an expression? In probably not.
No, I heard of it.
That's what in the Netherlands we call it dog loyal like a dog, which is not true at all, because the Feyenoord.
I think we say that a dog is a man's best friend is a saying, but perhaps not quite the same.
Yes. So the Feyenoord supporters call themselves the Legion because they're so big. But I sometimes tease them by saying, well, there were times when it was a very small Legion and not that big. So I'm going to use match level data for which they collected. So it's a bit shorter because I didn't want to update it over the past season because the purpose was just to show you that's not terribly sensitive. So investing in 3 additional seasons didn't make much sense. But what they did, they had weather conditions, temperature, rainfall. They've included whether the match was in a weekday or not. They have some performance indicators. They have match uncertainty and seasonal uncertainty. So it looks much more like a traditional match level data analysis. And this is what they find. This is for a weekday temperature, rainfall. Performance is how good they're doing in the season as compared to last season. Match uncertainty, I think that's the measure. I think was it the points per game, where Rob Simmons worked on that. And then the seasonal uncertainty. There's this what is it? The Jeanette measure, where you see how many matches within how many matches can you become a champion, and if somebody else becomes a champion, 0. If yourself is also 0. So it says something about uncertainties over a match or over the season. Unemployment rate, log Premier League and time. And what you see, weekdays, fewer attendance, temperature and rainfall doesn't matter that much. The better they do in terms of performance, the more people they attract. Match uncertainty doesn't seem to be very important. Seasonal uncertainty does seem to be important. I had 995 observations, so every match in all these seasons is present there. 32 opponents all in all. This looks very much like I showed you before. Unemployment rate significantly negative, Premier League positive, time positive. If I just do the seasonal level, so for 60 seasons, so I don't have all these match level indicators, then I find not too bad. So these coefficients are very much the same. So if you want to capture seasonal effects, you don't need to do match level data analysis. Now this is the final season of Johan Cruyff. So this at last assume means the final season. That was 1983, 1984. He spent his last season at Feyenoord. The reason was he got into a quarrel with Ajax. Cruyff is always known for wanting more money, and I think back then they offered him something like, I can't remember, something like 500,000 euro for a season. I think the total budget of Ajax was something like 1.5 million euros back then. So they offered him a third of the total budget they had, and he didn't want to do it. And Feyenoord made him a piece rate offer. So they said, we're going to pay you in terms of euro 65,000, but we're going to give you a piece rate. For every attendant more than 20,000 or 22,000, that's not clear. In the book, that there are these two numbers. He would receive 2 euros. There is the AD is a newspaper in Rotterdam. They had a tournament where they invited 4 or 3 big teams and had a tournament. He got 25% of the revenues of the tournament, which was 250,000 euros. You get 25% of all the revenues of the Euro Cup matches they would play. So this is the piece rate part of his contract. Now what happened is September 8th, they won 8-2 against Ajax. I think it's one of the biggest losses they've ever suffered against Ajax. Marco van Basten scored 3 times, I think. 8-2. So that was the supporters were not very happy with that. Now, November 2, 1983, we had these riots where I talked about earlier on. Cruyff was also playing there. They lost 2-0 against Feyenoord. 13 were seriously injured. But then early 1984, Feyenoord Ajax 4-1. So again, Marco van Basten was playing. Cruyff played every match in that season except for one away match, I think. He didn't always play 90 minutes, but he played most of the matches. In the final ranking, in terms of points, Feyenoord 57. This was again the time when you got 2 points for a win. PSV 52, Ajax 51. But the question is, was Johan Cruyff indeed successful in attracting more attendance to the stadium? Because this 22,000 was sort of an average over previous seasons. So he said, if I come and play for Feyenoord, we will attract more people. It's not that clear. So I'm first going to show you a graph. So these are home matches over the season. So you see that's about 20,000. There are peaks. So the black line is the Johan Cruyff season. The red line is the season before, and the blue line is the season after. And what you see, there are these peaks, big peaks. That's Ajax visiting. So that was a sold-out stadium. But if Ajax didn't visit, you see some fluctuations, but not a lot. The smaller peaks are PSV visiting. But all in all, so you could have 55,000 people in the stadium. I think usually there was something like 22,000. Here you see the cumulative, and you see that the previous season, the season previous to Johan Cruyff joining, and the Johan Cruyff season, they are very similar up to the last couple of matches. And so it's not that clear that Cruyff attracted many people. And here, if I look at the first 14 matches, so this is in thousands, 3 seasons, 351,000, 337, 279. So you see that this is the Cruyff season. In the season before that, there were even slightly more attendance than in the Cruyff season, except for the last 3. Now, what matters, of course, is they became a champion, and then you see that the last couple of matches, they attract more. But much to my surprise, which is unheard of, that I think they were already won the league here. So the 16th, 17th match at home, you see there are more than average, but still not more than 35,000. The last time Feyenoord became champion was a couple of years ago. They could have easily sold 200,000 tickets. The stadium was crowded. People were paying enormous amounts to be present. But here, they simply couldn't bother to enter the stadium, even although they were champions. Now, what you can do is put it in analysis for what it's worth. So I've redone what I've done before, game level, seasonal level, with all these indicators, also unemployment rate, Premier League time, and then do Johan Cruyff effect, which is a dummy for that season, a dummy for the season before, dummy for the season after. This is a significant difference. So you would say if you would simply look at these parameter estimates, you would conclude that Cruyff indeed attracted more people to the stadium. But if you look at these numbers, you see that's all towards the end. So then the question is an identification issue. Is it because Cruyff was there, or is it because they became champions? Of course, that's an identification problem in itself. A lot of people would claim that they wouldn't have won the league without Cruyff. That's it. Showed you match level analysis. Performance, stadium capacity may be important, but I think socioeconomic determinants are very important. Hooliganism, I couldn't find any effects. Common international trends are important, although I can't explain exactly what's going on. And I realize if I want to have a proper explanation of the various developments. We need any more detailed information about the various leagues. This was the last time they won the league, and I'm happy to say I was present there. If you want to do the analysis that I presented, except for the last bit when I talked about Feyenoord League, all the separate match level matches, if you click here, you'll find all the data.
Thanks very much, Jan. Thank you. Really interesting talk. There's a couple of things in the chat, and if folk want to raise their hands if they want to add further questions. Peter, who says the number of arrests per total attendance might be a better measure of hooliganism. He says, I know there are econometric problems, but arrests are found to be positively correlated to attendance, which might be caused by large crowds.
So there is reverse causality possible. If you have a bigger crowd, there is a bigger. Then to do that properly, you would need to model what hooliganism actually is, and then it's not clear whether well, there is always a couple of hooligans who do something, and then there is dynamics of crowds. So I don't know. I simply wanted to. I'm not claiming any causality here because there's also reverse causality possible, and in some of the estimates you even find a positive effect, which is more indicative of reverse causality. I can't see the chat, so you have to help me there.
Yeah, no, I will do. And Roger just left a comment saying that he had thought that the UK's 1980s issues were particular to the UK, but this data shows that it's not. And it reminds me, I had a chat with Reade Cutting a while ago, kind of on this. We both noticed this same 1980s dip that's occurred in both countries. Ian Gregory Smith has got his hand up.
Hi there. Jan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't see you, but I can hear you.
Oh, maybe I can turn my camera on. Hi. So I was just thinking about so separating out the Feyenoord effect from the young Cruyff effect. Did you consider the approach? So I remember years ago the Michael Jordan effect in NBA. It was a paper years ago in the Journal of Labour Economics. And there they looked at the impacts of Michael Jordan on other teams. So I was wondering if you could do the same. You could look at the impact on Cruyff when he plays, look at the attendance of the teams that he played against. So not in Feyenoord, look at the other teams. I
looked at the away matches, and there I do have the impression that from the back of my mind, I think it's there are more people attending the stadiums when Cruyff came there. But I didn't look at it in much detail. I think it was on average about 5,000. So it was quite a lot. But I don't remember it. I looked at it, but I didn't put it in the analysis.
So yeah, maybe that gets around the problem of.
Cruyff was not paid for the increase in the away attendance, only for home attendance.
No.
But I'll look at the Joly paper. I don't know that paper. I'll look and see whether I can do something about it. So I was much more ambitious here. Initially, I thought I could do a separate wallpaper on the AC superstar phenomenon, but it's very hard to actually dig deeper. But maybe the Joly paper will help me there.
Yeah. So it's Houseman and Leonard.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Ian. And then someone else has got their hand up. Jorge, you want to go ahead, ask your question?
Hi, hello. Great paper. I noticed that the attendance of most countries in your sample increased after the Bosman ruling, except for Italy, maybe. And thinking in terms of common patterns in international trends on soccer, and thinking about how connected are leagues in terms of attendance, what you're finding with this very interesting league parameter or estimate you're finding in your regressions. first, maybe is the fact that attendance in the late 90s and 2000s increased in Europe because essentially the best players are going to these leagues, and it just has to do with a matter of how relative quality relative to other countries in the world. But maybe also if we were able to find data, similar data for other countries beyond Europe, or even maybe Eastern Europe or Latin America, maybe you would find the trend going downward, connecting with the Bosman ruling, because relative quality is going down. Do you think that makes sense?
I think it's interesting to look at, but I'm not sure that we can get a lot out of it, because the consequences of the Bosman ruling for the Dutch league is that we lose all our best players. And still attendance has gone up tremendously. And while if you look, probably if you would make say sort of a plot of the quality of the players on the pitch for the Netherlands, I would have to think about how to do it, because I don't know whether the transfer market goes back in time that much, so I can say something about that. But my guess would be that at the time when the attendance was very low, we had quality players on the pitch. Because that was, well, we had excellent players back then. And also, as I said before, at the time when they won the European Championship 1988, attendance was very low. So it might be worthwhile looking at it, but my intuition is that it can't explain the big increase in the Netherlands. I can't really put my finger to it, because, well, it could also be that it's a different way of leisure activity. The visiting a stadium is different than it was maybe 40, 50 years ago, because you have the option of watching the match on television, and the surprising thing is that the stadium is much fuller than they were back then. Yeah, but it would be, I can have a look at the Bosman. I didn't think of it, but
it's worth saying that, going back to the England case, if you looked at, Roger pointed out the dip in the early 60s, that only picks up after England won their only World Cup, or only tournament of any note, in 1966, before then tailing back off in the 1970s. So it could be that things kicked off there, and then they obviously carried on with the other developments in kind of television and other social changes in the 1990s, perhaps.
it could be that there is a positive shock to the system, like a country wins a prestigious prize, a national team, or even a club team. But that's very hard to establish the effect. If it's like a trigger effect.
Yeah, Stefan's got his hand up.
Well, actually, on that last point, I have a paper with Bastien Drew on the impact of hosting major tournaments on attendance at domestic clubs across the last 40, 50 years. So we looked at attendance at every host country for the Euros and for the World Cup, and we do find a significant effect on attendance for hosting in almost all cases. So that's something we looked at. But I wanted to ask about the Cruyff effect. So did Cruyff affect the performance of Feyenoord, and was that so? I've always liked the surprise variable that you've used in explaining attendance before. So I wondered whether was there any surprise about any effect that Cruyff had on the attendance, and could you put that into your regression and see whether there's a Cruyff surprise effect?
Well, it would be worthwhile looking at it, but I don't think the bookmaker data go back that long. But maybe I could come up with another surprise variable, because there are. You could look at the cumulative results in the previous season against. I might think about it. But Well, reading the book, so there's this, unfortunately it is in Dutch. This is the last season. Cruyff was not very popular among many of the Feyenoord supporters for a very long time. He changed the system of play. They had a left, what do you say, left winger, left forward, who was a very creative player, but not very efficient. And he could do beautiful things on the pitch, but it hardly ever led to some goal scoring opportunity or something like that. But he didn't run with his defender. And then Cruyff, who was a left midfielder back then, he had to run a lot. So he had to put in a lot of energy of defending the back player from the opponent, the right back from the opponent. And then his suggestion was to have a left back play as a left wing player, as a left forward. And that that was sort of, I think, a game changer in the sense that all of a sudden Cruyff didn't have to run that much. He could focus on the creative bit. So he could, well, he could make beautiful passes, score beautiful goals because he wasn't tired all the time. Of course, the public didn't like that. The idea that a creative player had to stay on the bench while a left back was playing as a left forward. They booed him off the pitch. That guy is now head of the youth academy of Feyenoord. That's left back. So I think he changed the system a lot, but he was not that popular. He was always complaining, always talking all the time. He was never.
But you still won the title, wasn't that worth something?
Yeah, of course. No, I'm extremely happy. But of course, in terms of identification, a lot of people say, "Oh, we probably would have won the league anyway." So I might look at the surprise variable. Will not be a surprise variable as I've created it for other more reasons.
That would be nice.
I'm not sure whether I should go into that, but it's tempting.
You could use ELO ratings is one way you could create a surprise variable that far back. Carl put in the chat that the Beckham effect, David Beckham effect in MLS was similar in that it was more on away matches attendances. And there's apparently a few papers that have found that as well.
Yeah, originally I also wanted to look at the contribution of Johan Cruyff to Barcelona and so on and so forth, but I found that already with Feyenoord was very difficult to establish contribution, that I didn't go into that. Yeah,
and as I mentioned when I was chatting with you yesterday, I've looked at the case of Tom Finney in England at Preston North End in the late 1950s, early 1960s, because he didn't play all matches, so therefore you could look at the attendance in the matches he played versus didn't, and there was quite a significant effect on the attendance, kind of similar to your coefficient actually. So
yeah, Cruyff always played in every home match.
Any more questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Jan, for a really enjoyable talk, very interesting talk, very rigorous talk, and a nice extension to score 3 goals with 1 ball. Thank you very much for your time. Next week, we're going to have Ray Vamplu of the University of Stirling talking about the emergence of commercialization in sport, and that will mark our year of meeting online this way, because essentially next week will be the equivalent Fridays to the first Friday we met back in 2020. We'll then take a break for Easter, and we're going to return after Easter with Peter Kruhus giving the first talk, and then Stefan will give a talk after that. And so for now, thank you once again, Jan. Thank you everyone for your contributions. A really interesting talk, and have a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you again this time next week.
Thanks.